everyone, and welcome to this special mini-sode of the Wine Pair Podcast. I'm Joe, your sommelier of reasonably priced wine, and this is my wife and my wine pairing partner in crime, Carmela.
Hello!
Nice, and we are the Wine Pair.
Yay!
If you're new to the Wine Pair Podcast, these mini-sodes are just shorter episodes of the regular podcast that we put on in weeks when we're going to be traveling or handling other life stuff. And instead of tasting and reviewing 2 to 3 wines under $25 that are easy to find, which is what we usually do in our longer episodes, in these mini-sodes, we focus more on things like wine etiquette, wine education, and wine tips.
Nice.
And we try to make it fun and understandable to regular, everyday people.
I love it.
And we're proud to say...
It's a little nibble, right?
It's a little nibble. It's a little taste spoon.
I love it.
Yeah, we're proud to say our podcast is recommended by Decanter Magazine.
Cool.
There you go. Mm-hmm. Okay, so for this mini-sode, Carmela, we are going to tackle the controversial topic of minerality. It's a big deal.
It's controversial,
It's super controversial.
Seriously? Ooh,
We're going to talk about why. Now, for many of you out there in listening land, like it is for Carmela, it's not really a controversial topic. But let's just say, in the world of wine nerds, minerality is grounds for a fight.
Yeah. See, I just said I like controversy, and that was actually a big fat lie because I'm actually a conflict avoider. But back to the show.
We kind of both are.
Okay.
But before we get to the controversy, we do have to start a little bit further back with just what the minerality is in the first place. Okay?
True.
So minerality, here's what it is, Carmela.
Okay.
If you didn't know.
Give it to me.
Minerality refers to aromas and flavors and textures of wine in the mouth.
Okay. And there are
as
particular
opposed to
types
textures of wine in your hand.
I know. Okay. In the mouth. The
Yeah.
way you said that just didn't seem very wine-like.
No, but I agree. When you and I talk about minerality, we put it in plain words, in understandable words.
Mm-hmm.
Like the wine is salty.
Right.
Or the wine tastes like licking a rock.
I was thinking you always say that one.
Or it has gunpowder on it.
Okay.
Or it tastes a little chalky.
Mm-hmm,
and some other words you might hear that wine nerds or wine snobs say are things like earthy or stone or flinty or graphite or pencil lead or petroleum or gasoline or metallic
And should
or
you
gravelly
really put those
or oily.
things in your mouth?
Well, here's the thing, is that they sound bad.
Mm-hmm.
But when we're talking about wine, they're actually good. Like,
Right.
they're not as horrible as you would think they are.
Well, it's a weird thing. It's like we've talked about when you like the smell of gasoline.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, I was one of those kids.
Yeah.
I loved the smell of gasoline.
Who doesn't?
I don't know, but
I still do it.
Weird.
I just go by my car sometimes and just.
No.
Yes, I know. I
No,
don't.
but I can. So that's why, yes, you kind of, for whatever reason, the taste when it's in wine is kind of palatable.
Yeah, it's weird. And so there's a lot of other flavors, aromas related to minerality, and you can find those in our show notes. Did you know we have show notes?
Yep.
So we have links to articles there. But the interesting thing is that the range of descriptors within this concept of minerality is super wide. I mean, we talked about a lot, everything from an oily feel in the mouth to gunsmoke, it's super wide, which is one of the reasons why it's controversial, because the description or experience of minerality is considered super subjective, and it's not really clearly defined. Like, it's not like a really super strict thing.
Okay. Like, give an example of what a strict thing would be when you're talking about a particular taste.
Well, like tannin is pretty clear.
Okay.
Like a wine has tannin or it doesn't. Like, it has a lot. Now, the experience of it, somebody may experience it in different ways than somebody else does, but that's not controversial. Or oaky. That taste of oakiness that comes from the oak barrels, that's not controversial. But minerality is controversial. So, for instance, sometimes minerality is described more texturally, like dense or smooth or gritty or chalky or oily, and others describe it as more taste-oriented, like rock or pencil shavings or gasoline, and sometimes it's both. So it's a really broad swath of experiences. So now we're getting to the controversial part. Many people consider these tastes and aromas and sensations of minerality to be highly related to terroir, which again, terroir is the fancy way of saying the place, like where it's from. And so, for instance, if a wine is grown in volcanic soils, like we talked about in our recent Greco di Tuffo episode, then people say, oh, that comes through in the wine. Or if it's grown in clay soils, oh, that's coming through in the wine. But here's the interesting thing, Carmela.
Tell me, Joe.
There is no scientific evidence to support a direct transfer of geological minerals into wine. There is no science behind it. So that's
so
really
nobody's just studied it.
No, I'm saying they can't prove it.
Well, sure.
They have looked at it, but they can't prove it. So, in other words, although people talk about these tastes and sensations, scientists have not been able to find that the soil a grape is grown in matters to its taste from a minerality standpoint. Isn't that interesting?
That is very interesting.
Minerality also, Carmela, is kind of a newish term. Some sources say that it really only gained traction in the 80s. And while it's used quite often today as a descriptor, again, there's no real definition. It's so controversial, in fact, that some people in the wine nerd community call it a myth.
So
a myth.
Okay.
Not just a myth conception.
Is it, wow. Is it sort of like a placebo then? Like people just kind of, you tell them something and then they're expecting for it to come through?
Yeah. Like
it has not been founded.
Exactly. Like maybe people are like, oh, it's grown in volcanic soils. Oh, I taste rock.
So nobody's detecting it without first knowing what the terroir is.
No, I don't think that that's true. I just think that they ascribe certain tastes. I mean, I get what you're saying, but I don't think it's only placebo. I mean, we will taste wines without knowing where they're from, and we will get these sensations.
Right.
So here's what science says, Carmela. Scientists are clear that vines do not directly absorb geological minerals from soil or rocks through their roots. The science is very clear. They are not absorbing those minerals. So minerality is not coming in physically through the plant. Now, the vines absorb dissolved chemical elements from the soil, but these come from organic matter and include essential elements like nitrogen or potassium or calcium or iron. So there is some things coming through. And there's research that suggests that minerality is actually highly tied to acidity and sulfur dioxide levels in wine. So here's a quote. The vine roots do not take up blue slate or limestone. They take up stuff like magnesium, potassium, copper, or iron.
Okay.
Now, these nutrient minerals, while necessary for the vine, so that's interesting. So, okay, well, something's coming in there. So these nutrients do not have a direct taste or aroma and are present in such small concentrations that they are highly unlikely to directly impart a taste or a flavor. So they shouldn't be impacting the taste. But despite the lack of direct mineral transfer, many people perceive what they describe as mineral flavors like whetstone or flint and textural sensations like chalkiness or slate. And I know we do.
We do.
We talk about it all the time.
Yeah, it's interesting that it does come through for us without even knowing.
Yes, and this is part of the contention because the experience of whatever minerality actually is, it does exist for the taster. Yeah. So despite the fact that science says, hey, this stuff is not getting in through the vines, we are experiencing it. We're not crazy.
Let me
or maybe
not
we are crazy.
open up a can of worms.
All right.
But because it's used by lots of people, those terms, again, could it be a little placebo?
Or at least like...
Or just put in our heads, like an idea that's put in our heads.
No, I like that. It's like the culture of wine tasting requires you to say these things.
Right, and because we've heard it in different settings or in different articles or, whatever, are we using some of that terminology because it's been placed in our heads?
Yeah, like severance. I don't know.
Oh my gosh.
It's possible. A new episode tonight.
Yeah.
Okay. The scientific community says minerality has very little or nothing to do with the vines or the soil, but there may be things in the wine-making process that impact these sensations. So for instance, wines that have less exposure to oxygen are more likely to be considered mineral. And that means using stainless steel tanks, and minimizing racking and stirring. So,
I can get behind that.
yep, and wines that are less fruity and have higher levels of acid are said to be higher in minerality, which is why white wines will give these tastes and sensations since they're often fermented and stored in stainless steel and they're high in acid. And so that's why we often get these in white wines and get them a lot less in red wines.
Right.
So ultimately, go ahead.
So it may be more about how they're made.
Yes,
right.
Exactly. More about the style or the way in which they're
technique.
Exactly,
Yeah.
than it is anything else. So the scientific community tends to view minerality as a term without scientific basis, but wine lovers do experience something in the wine that they use specific terms tied to minerality as descriptors for.
Okay.
And a lot of wine nerds will still say that terroir matters a lot when it comes to wine, and they use the term a lot when referring to things like soil composition. We talk about it, or how much water stress the grapevines get. Remember, grapes like water stress, and rockier and chalkier soils are said to cause more stress. So this may impact the sensation of minerality because it can impact things like acidity rather than minerals coming through the vines.
I can see that.
And then finally, there are some varietals that are more associated with minerality, especially, again, like we said, white wine, which makes sense because they're usually higher acid. And so they're wines that often are described with minerality are Riesling, often gasoline. I smell gasoline.
Right.
Or Sauvignon Blanc, Pinot Gris, Chardonnay, especially Chablis when it's not oaked, we get these sensations. And then there are some red wines like Syrah and Pinot Noir that will sometimes have these minerality qualities. So there are also then regions that are known for having highly mineral wines. So Chablis, which is an area where Chardonnay is made in France, often considered highly mineral. Sancerre, which is Sauvignon Blanc in France and the Loire, you will have that sense. Priorat, Grenache in Spain, Mosel in Germany, Santorini, Greece, Chianti Classico in Italy, Muscadet in France. These are wines that are considered highly mineral. Probably has more to do with the growing conditions and the process than anything else. Oh. And again, it's not a surprise to me to find that many of the wines on this list that I just went through are wines that we like, and they're high mineral wines because we like acid-driven wines. Mm-hmm. So here's the thing, the final thing about it.
Let's hear it.
Minerality is a broad term that wine nerds like to use. So we think you out there in listening land should at least know about it.
Yeah.
And know some of the vocabulary.
Right. So you understand what people are talking about.
Exactly. It doesn't mean you have to use it, but I think it's helpful sometimes, like if you're reading some review or you're watching somebody on YouTube and they say, oh, it's
Flint.
Exactly. You're like, oh, I know kind of what they're talking about when they describe it. And I think what's important is that you start to see if maybe you can taste and smell and feel some of these sensations in wines when you drink them. I think that's kind of an interesting thing. I mean, I think as we have grown more and more, I don't know if I would call it, I don't think I'd call it sophisticated. I would just say we've gotten more and more used to it.
Right, or accustomed to the different tastes that might come through.
Yeah, and I think then you do start to pick up these things every once in a while where you're like, oh, yeah, I get that. And then I think you see when you read reviews, oh, they picked that up too. So that's just kind of interesting.
And it also helps you understand what you prefer in terms of taste. Like if you are somebody who likes minerality notes, then it might be a wine that you enjoy.
Exactly. And I think that's helpful. Are you going to like a wine that's made in a certain area or a certain way because it may have these aspects of minerality and you may say, I love that or I don't like it. It just helps you make better choices when you're looking for what wines, because you don't want to say, I want a white wine or a red wine. You want to decide which ones do you like. We don't like oaky Chardonnays. They don't have a lot of minerality. Chablis, which is an unoaked Chardonnay, has minerality. We tend to like it. There you go. That's a way that we can discern what we're going to like or not.
True.
But that's the story, Carmela.
I'm sticking to it.
Sticking to it. If you want more information, I got a lot of sources in our show notes. If you want to learn more, come on down to our website, thewinepairpodcast.com, and you can find our links.
My goodness.
And then you can also check out other minisodes or regular sized episodes on the website. You can also follow us on Instagram at the Wine Pair Podcast or on Blue Sky. And if you go to our website, back to our website, you can sign up for our email newsletter there. You can reach out to us. You can send us an email at joe@thewinepairpodcast.com about things you want to know or things you're curious about or things you think are controversial in wine, and we'll talk about them.
Perfect.
So there you go. We hope that you'll follow us and come back again after this little taste test, this little taste spoon.
I think so.
All right, with that, we're going to say see you later.
Ciao, ciao.
And remember, as we like to say, life is short, so stop drinking shitty wine. Bye-bye.
Bye.